Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us today as we explore some topics around email journaling. So the session today will take about 30 minutes and it's all about the journey that you might be looking to go on with your journal if you're heading towards Office 365. So we're going to cover, get the slide deck going. So we're going to cover what's new in Office 365 when it comes to email capture and retention. Some options out there for your legacy journal, what that migration path might look like if you want to bring your journal content into Office 365. We're also going to look at some alternative places for your journal if you don't want to bring it with you into Office 365, and just give you some starting points really to kind of open up conversation if you're sort of mulling over the options at the moment in your business. So my name's Laura Hill. I work to support our team here at Essential as they help our customers get more out of Office 365. So I've been involved in data migration projects for several years now, and certainly as a company over the last 15 years or more, we've built up quite a solid reputation for ourselves as specialists in email management. Email archiving has been a key part of our business for well over a decade now. So architecting archives, implementing them, managing them, migrating in between them, helping our customers kind of navigate this world of cloud. So it's really out of that background and that experience that we're presenting this webinar to you today. So what's going on with journaling nowadays? So let's just kind of remind ourselves of what a journal is and why you might have one. So in the sense of an on-premises environment, journaling is where you set up Exchange servers in a way that it will send a copy of every email sent and received into a single journal mailbox. Larger environments might have a few, but for this purpose, a single journal mailbox. So if you're using journaling, you'll be doing so to comply with probably some external regulations around email retention, or maybe just because it's kind of deemed good practice and has become your internal policy. And you're most likely going to be siphoning all that journal content away from Exchange into a third-party archive so that it can just be stored much more securely, more efficiently, than it would otherwise if you left it sat in Exchange. So you might have an on-prem archive, something like Semantic Enterprise Vault, Xantar's as was EAS, or maybe a cloud service already where they're providing this journal feature for you, something like Mimecast or Proofpoint. So over time, a lot of organisations have built up very large journal archives, and they're now moving to Office 365 where things are very different. So decisions are kind of needing to be made about what to do with this old journal. So along comes Office 365, out goes journaling as we kind of knew it, and in comes this concept of in-place archiving. So Office 365 itself does not provide single journal mailboxes for retaining extra copies of messages. So instead, you manage all your archiving and your email compliance down at the user level. So you'll likely be making use of the in-place archive, this kind of secondary archive mailbox, and if needs be, putting relevant users on something called litigation hold, which is your guarantee that nothing is going to get deleted. So to be on litigation hold means that behind the scenes, if a user deletes or alters an email, the message will get removed from the user's view and put into a special hidden folder inside something called a RIF, a recoverable items folder, which sits down inside the user's mailbox. So it's not visible to end users. And then from a search perspective, Office 365 gives you advanced e-discovery, which is a kind of set of features for those with permissions to search, across all of your Office 365 mailboxes, including these hidden RIF folders for those on litigation hold. And then layered on that, the sort of integration of Equivio, which is this specialist search analytics software, bringing you features around e-discovery that perhaps your legal and HR teams are getting to grips with. So that's sort of a high-level view of what's available now, and where our team come in is to kind of help you figure out how to move from journaling into this new model, which brings us on to thoughts around what to do with your old journal. What I'm going to talk through today is a couple of different approaches. It's not the only options by a long stretch, but it is some of the more common ones that we're seeing. So having given it some thought, you might decide that your journal archive can just stay exactly where it is. So especially perhaps if you've got just a smaller group of users or mailboxes that need to be journaled, you might look at keeping that subset of more compliant users just where they are and keep the journal going that way. A customer of ours, Capita, who made up of lots of different business units with quite specific requirements, have taken this approach. You might also just be looking at simply retiring the archive. We've seen circumstances where organisations have already moved to Office 365 and the journal archive has sort of just been left standing still, really. So if you're kind of within reach of hitting its retention date on that content, then you might just decide to let it run its course and ultimately retire it. Especially if maybe the cost and the effort involved in migration doesn't quite stack up against the cost of just keeping the archive alive for a few more years. I suppose there's obviously the overheads of continuing to store that journal data and pay any support and maintenance, etc. But yeah, the do nothing option is there and it can be a valid one. But equally, if it's not, then you're probably going to be looking at a migration project. So let's move on to that. So firstly, we're going to explore migrating a journal into Office 365, where the migration path that we recommend is based on using Transvault software, which is very mature, massively flexible migration tool. So it's designed to take journal content directly from on-premise archives, like Enterprise Vault, or from data exports from cloud archives like Mimecast, for example, and migrate that content into Office 365. So here's a little bit of insight into how we use it. So we obviously went through earlier the differences between how Microsoft have moved on from journal to this concept of individual user archives. So bringing your old journal data with you into Office 365 is always going to be challenging because that data is by definition not partitioned in a per user way. It is just one big pot of data. But the experts of Transvault have worked closely with Microsoft and they've come up with something pretty unique, which basically involves taking emails from your old journal archive and dispersing them across multiple Office 365 end user mailboxes. So it goes through a process of analysing each message in your journal and then migrates a copy of the relevant message into individual mailboxes of the original recipients. It's basically making it as though it was actually Office 365 that had captured those messages in the first place. So it puts that content into the recoverable items folder. If you remember, this is where that litigation hold is carried out and this area invisible to end users. So taking this approach, you end up with the emails from your old journal now residing in user mailboxes in Office 365, where it's then available to be searched and managed, however you then sort of go on to use Office 365 for compliance. So the companies we're helping to do this with are those that are really fully embracing Office 365 for email management. The in-place archive model suits them. Their e-discovery teams are really happy with the Office 365 search and the case management tools. It's literally a case of wanting to bring their legacy data into line with the Office 365 way of doing things. And certainly a benefit of this approach is that you will have all your email in one place, making search and implementing compliance on a user level much simpler. Also, for some, it's quite a strong option if they're just wanting to bring content relating to a certain subset of users. So one of the utility company we've been working with, they're just going to bring content from their trading arm, just those users into Office 365 this way. So it's quite a good way of being selective in what you migrate from old journals. On the downside, is not a quick project. So the migration element of it is highly performant. It is as quick as it can be. Your limitation really is only ever going to be your source archive. Transvault have done all kinds of clever things to accelerate the processing involved of migrating into Office 365. But it's this upfront analysis phase. It can take quite a bit of time. Being able to capture information about each individual message in your old journal. So if your archive is under-resourced or you've got an enormous amount of data in the journal, it can take time, and you do need to factor that in. Also, in our experience, to make it really work as a project, you've kind of got to be prepared to take the bull by the horns and be prepared to be quite decisive about what you want to migrate and how you want to handle certain messages. You've got a load of very powerful capability from the software, but it really will be down to you to make a bit of a judgment call on how you're going to use it to meet your compliance needs. So projects that lack serious drive around compliance, they can risk flaking out a little bit, and the project can drag on a bit. There is also an amount of mailbox provisioning that needs to take place. So a process of creating a target mailbox for messages that have been found in the journal, that relate to users who maybe don't currently have a live Office 365 mailbox, because they're a user who left donkey's years ago. So it's not a difficult thing in itself, but it is part of a wider process that does need thinking about. So it's a really clever solution for companies that do want to bring everything into line with Office 365 and have got some strong compliance-led drivers around the journal migration. But it's not for everyone. So alternatively, you could look at migrating your journal data into Office 365 in its current form, just chopped up a bit. So migrated into a defined number of target mailboxes in Office 365. Illustration here, you could perhaps set up one per year, per quarter, and so on. So it becomes a case of migrating just one copy of the message from the old journal into Office 365, into these kind of separate pseudo journal mailboxes, so not dispersed across end user mailboxes. This is sometimes known as journal splitting. And we're kind of keen to stress that it can be migrated this way, as in it physically can. The technology, the process exists to do it, but we are a little bit wary of it, if we're honest. And the main reason it makes us a little bit twitchy is that it does go against how Microsoft have designed Office 365 for handling email compliance. Actually, at this time, it kind of goes against their licensing agreements as well. But even if you're not too hung up on the licensing issue, we think it is worth considering that if you're going against the way that Microsoft have designed archiving in Office 365 and are evolving all of their features for email compliance, then you might not be able to tap into some of the future good stuff that Microsoft come out with. For example, they're working a lot around kind of facilitating GDPR compliance and, being able to search and ring fence sensitive personal data. So if you've migrated old content into Office 365 this way, certainly from an e-discovery perspective, you're definitely going to want to make sure that your search teams don't forget about these journal mailboxes that you've set up. Also, if you do take this approach, we'd advise you to make sure you're happy with how the BCC information and the distribution list information is handled. You don't want to be missing out on that stuff in your searches in the future. Okay, so that's some options for getting your old journal content into Office 365. But what if you don't want to do that? What if you actually are keen to scrap your existing archive technology, be it on-premise or a cloud service, but actually you don't deem Office 365 the best place for your legacy journal? What else can you do with it? So we think there are some good alternative options, and there's some good cloud archive options. When it comes to email retention, we've kind of found that companies are asking us again now for some of the core things that they were asking for when we first started out implementing archives 15 years ago. And that is a secure place to keep their data, storage efficiency to try and curb some of the costs of retention, some tools to manage the life cycle of data as time goes on, a means of fulfilling compliance by being able to set up policies, certainly around retention, and also the ability to search, even at this most basic level, just to be able to perform searches, ring fence data, export it, and facilitate some kind of workflow around that process. The difference now is that the technology has moved on massively, and the cloud certainly brings much more opportunity for scalability and throwing resource at your archive demands, and just being much more active amongst your data so that you can manage cost a lot better. So if you want an alternative place for your journal to sit alongside Office 365, we do recommend looking at some of these sort of second generation cloud archives. But as with many things, not all are made equal, and you will no doubt have your own list of things that are important, security, specific features, ease of use. But we'd recommend that you explore these three areas a little bit. They're definitely things that we are finding are setting some of the solutions that we're aware of apart. First one being true scalability and performance of search. So especially for those who know that you've really got the potential to hit your archive hard with some serious indexing demands. We've been thinking sort of internally quite a lot around GDPR, and we're not quite sure how things will play out, but it does sound as though many companies are taking it quite seriously and are gearing themselves up to be able to fulfill wide-reaching search on their data, and they need that search to take hours, not days and weeks. And certainly cloud archives give you the potential for much slicker search than you might be used to with an on-premise archive solution. But we'd still urge you to kind of thrash out with your vendor how they do it. What is the engine behind it? What's the architecture behind it? What might the limitations be around search? Export flexibility is also worth thinking about. I'm kind of the opinion that being in true ownership of your data means you do actually have the flexibility to get your hands on it when you want it and be able to extract it into a useful format. We've worked with clients who felt they've been held to ransom a little bit for their data when they want to get it out of cloud services, so maybe be careful there. You might also want the ability to archive other legacy data, so to help you get a handle on the retention of unstructured data in other forms in the future, so from file shares, SharePoint, so I suppose maybe just don't go into it purely with your email head on. So here's a bit of an introduction to a cloud archive that we've done our homework on and we're really going places with, and it's called HubStore. And in a nutshell, HubStore is a Microsoft Azure-based archive storage solution, into which you can put content, you can put file content, legacy data that you just don't want retained on-prem anymore. For example, your old email journal. So you get a ton of features to help you then go on to manage that data over time. So here's some of the reasons that we're really happy to be able to offer this to some of our customers. First and foremost, it is very, very straightforward. So it's a super efficient way to store your data in the cloud using your Azure tenant or HubStores if you're not doing your own thing with Azure. So it will store the data compressed, deduplicated. It has features to help you manage the life cycle of data, with policies, and it's very easy to export your content. It's designed So you can really tap into everything that Azure is all about. So just that flexibility to move content in and out, to scale up instantly if you need to, which we know can be really helpful if you've got periods of needing high volumes of content to be indexed, or you've got some very intensive e-discovery work going on, for example. You also pay as you go. The pricing element is totally transparent. It's got per gig, per month kind of metering model that just layers on top of Azure costs as a disclosed markup. So you see exactly what's going on and you only pay for what you use. It's also got very powerful search, which is something that we really did our due diligence on, knowing the demands of some of our larger customers, and frequently witnessing their current search indexes kind of creaking at the seams and costing them a lot of money to maintain. So with the search, you can really scale that up or scale it back down, I suppose, during quiet periods just to keep costs down. So it's just a refreshingly different way of doing things compared to some of the old on-premise archives. So for our customers needing a journal archive solution, here's how it works. So HubStore does not compete with Office 365. It will sit in Microsoft Azure and it complements it. It kind of fills a bit of a gap, offering storage for legacy unstructured data like your files and your emails. So if you're looking for an alternative place for your legacy journal archives in the cloud, then you could simply ingest the content of your current journal into HubStore, freeing you up then to decommission your on-prem archive and all the storage and servers associated with it. And Essential can help you with this migration path in to make sure that you've got a full chain of custody and everything is all present and correct. And then once you're in, you can manage the retention of that content, and you can equip your e-discovery teams with extra tools to kind of help them manage the search and workflow around that content. And if you wanted to keep this concept of journaling alive, you can simply set up an SMTP feed direct from Office 365 so that you've got a complete rolling record then of all email. So for some, HubStore has become the single go-to place for e-discovery across email, be that legacy content, right up to the present day. So just to wrap things up today, we wanted to leave you with a bit of food for thought on things to think about when you're deciding what to do with your journal as you go to Office 365. We frequently run workshops to help our customers with this, and these are just some of the things that our consultants go through. Okay, so pretty obvious place to start, I know. But what is your retention policy? How active are you really in kind of managing the life cycle and the deletion of data once it's expired? And certainly a solution to help you manage a 2-year churn of data will look very different to one that's designed to help you keep every single email forever. Equally valid retention policies, but probably very different outcomes to this decision you're about to make and what to do with your journal. And also, which business units or specific individuals does it apply to? So maybe you don't actually need to capture everything for everybody. One of the things with on-prem archives is that they've historically made this decision to just keep everything for everybody forever through journaling quite easy. They're normally really storage efficient with single instancing. So journaling may not have had in the past that much impact on storage. But now things have changed. Maybe it's a time to kind of review that. Another thing that we've always been keen to understand with customers is what are their needs for email retention from an operational perspective. So how far back do users expect email to be available to them in order that they can just carry out their jobs, versus how long do you need to be keeping email to actually tick the compliance boxes, and be compliant with any regulations that you are actually obliged to adhere to. So the two sometimes can be quite different, and if they are, you might actually end up looking at two different approaches for retaining email. So to give you an example, we did some work for a waste management company a little while ago, and they went for Office 365 archiving functionality for retention from a kind of operational and user perspective, but then they opted for a completely separate cloud solution for compliant retention and search. And that system is working really well for them. Secondly, you're already paying out for these Office 365 licenses. How can you really get the most out of it and everything that Microsoft are offering you around archiving and compliance and search? We strongly recommend that you take time to really get an understanding of what the teams of people in your company are expected to do with email, especially those who will be actually responding in any kind of GDPR related inquiries in the future. You then take that and really explore what Office 365 gives you. How available does that content need to be? How often is it searched? How far reaching are those searches going to need to be? What kind of export procedure is required? Maybe simulate some kind of common search situations that team faces to help you determine what your e-discovery needs actually are. We had some interesting conversations last week with a local authority whose IT team's absolute priority for this was that once they'd migrated away from their on-premise archive, they could completely free themselves of the burden of actually carrying out searches across email. And well, it's been rightly so, actually doing e-discovery, even if it's just that initial data capture phase, it shouldn't really be in their remit. But until they'd delivered their compliance team with a solution that really worked, they didn't stand a chance of washing their hands of searching email. So they are really getting into the detail of what life is going to be like in Office 365 for the people who frequently need to search stuff. And there's a lot there. It's constantly changing and improving, but you do have to be quite active to sort of make sure that you're taking advantage of it all, and that is something that our team can help you with. And there's a lot of resources online. So thirdly, it is worth thinking about that migration path for your legacy journal data. So there's no point in choosing a target archive platform for all its security and all its compliance features if then your migration path into it for all your old content completely breaks chain of custody, strips your emails of all important stuff like BCC information, or puts your data at risk in any way. So you might have learned some valuable lessons from other migrations that you've done recently. So maybe kind of revisit lessons learned around those. If not, you can certainly learn from some of ours. We've been on some interesting journeys with migration into Office 365 and other platforms. So I suppose for you, what is important around migration? Does every message need to be accounted for? The reality is some messages just won't make it if they're old and they've become corrupt. How do you want to handle that? How important is it to maintain the integrity of the email and not alter anything or cause any bits of information to not be exposed to search indexing in the future? Do you need to support ongoing e-discovery whilst you're doing the migration? If so, who's going to be affected by that? Have you got targets, deadlines, things going on that might impact the process? Will your source archive environment actually handle the extraction of data, or will it fall over itself as soon as you start any of this processing work? Lots of things to kind of think about around that migration path. I suppose one of the good things about journal migrations compared to other email migrations is that users aren't involved, so you can kind of crack on with it at your own pace behind the scenes. You don't have to plan for a vast amount of change to the user experience. But one of the downsides, or just one of the facts of the matter is, because it kind of crosses over into this world of compliance and e-discovery and process around that. It's not just a technical IT thing. You'll be looking for input from other parts of the business to decide on what to do about it. And that might require a bit of patience, maybe some work to clearly present to the business the options that are available, the pros, the cons of various approaches, as you kind of facilitate reaching a joint conclusion around what to do with the journal. If you need support with those kind of discussions, our team are very knowledgeable. We can perhaps put together one of our journal workshops for you. So we're thinking about, we're going to leave it there. Thanks very much.